The Daily Wire has not exactly been pulling the numbers and the relevance that they did in the past as of late. And I think this kind of goes back mainly to the Trump administration. The Daily Wire has repeatedly thrown its support behind Trump, defending Trump at every turn for the last 8+ years. About a decade now at this point. They've tied their brand to MAGA and to Donald Trump. And this presidency has proved to be far worse than his first term, which was already disappointing for a lot of people that were dumb enough to support him the first time around. And now, the Daily Wire is being forced to repeatedly take positions to defend increasingly unpopular policy. It's not doing well for them, let me tell you. Ben Shapiro seems to be, these days, the only one of the major Daily Wire hosts that's still pulling numbers, and I mean, it's not exactly huge. Like, sometimes he gets a banger, but for the most part, it's very hit or miss with him now. I think a lot of it has to do with these unpopular positions they've taken. A lot of Ben Shapiro's own fans and the Daily Wire's own fans were mad at them when they critiqued, not even critiqued, they outright admonished the killer of that CEO. We don't know it was Luigi Mangione. Could have been anybody. I didn't see him do it. But yeah, they admonished the killer, presumably Luigi Mangione. That's who they said it was, and their own audiences were upset about that. I don't know. It feels like they're in a position now where they tied themselves to a sinking cement block, and they're gasping for air, clawing at the surface, hoping they'll somehow be able to get back to fresh air. And I don't think it's going to happen because guess what? The Daily Wire, the prominent right-wing news outlet, has been hit with mass layoffs as of yesterday, May 1st. The far-right Daily Wire faced mass layoffs this week, gutting the team of the long prominent outlet initially founded by conservative activist Ben Shapiro. According to The Wrap, Ben Shapiro's right-wing media company confirmed the layoffs in a statement to media on Friday afternoon, saying that impacted staffers are a number of teams, and layoffs were largely concentrated to its Nashville headquarters. That's literally the core of the Daily Wire, by the way.
Today, the Daily Wire made a difficult decision to restructure the organization, which included layoffs to a number of teams.
Wait, sorry, that wasn't Ben speaking. That was a spokesperson who said that, but you can imagine Ben said it. The Daily Wire has been the focus of drama in previous years, one of the biggest incidents being the firing of right-wing star Candace Owens for pushing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. This is a pretty big one, by the way. Candace Owens was, without a doubt, one of the biggest voices on the Daily Wire, up there with Ben Shapiro, and another ex-Daily Wire host, Brett Cooper. Candace Owens has continued to grow massively. She's maintained a massive audience. She trend chases and hops around the political spectrum to be wherever she can make the most money and remain the most popular. And that means she hasn't tied herself to the same brick that the Daily Wire did. She jumped that ship before it even started sinking. In fact, you could argue that her jumping the ship is a big part of why it's now sinking. And that's exactly where they are now. Candace Owens is just dunking on the Daily Wire, kind of laughing as they sink, and her show is doing better than ever. And we don't like Candace Owens here. I think she's the biggest grifter in all of right-wing politics without a single shadow of a doubt. But it is still really funny to watch one of the most long-standing right-wing propaganda organizations tear itself apart. Then of course there's Brett Cooper. She was massive. She was like the e-girl face of the Daily Wire. She was their way of bringing in a more young, hip generation. Let's be real, the rest of the Daily Wire hosts, except for Candace Owens, also gone, appeal to boomers. Even Ben Shapiro these days appeals more to boomers. Matt Walsh definitely appeals more to boomers and Gen X and maybe millennials. But, the idea of reaching a younger demographic, getting to the youth, was thrown out the window when they fired Candace Owens and lost Brett Cooper. And now, the Daily Wire, it seems like it's on its last leg. The news of the sharp cutbacks led to an immediate reaction on social media. Hey, I'm part of that. Despite the press release, the Daily Wire was pushing to billionaires' blogs that few people read. It's been an open secret in the media that the Daily Wire is crashing, wrote BBC Communications founder Mitchell Jackson, adding, many smart people worked there. I'll say this about the Daily Wire layoffs, wrote Democratic strategist Mike Nellis. When I did their show, bar fight back in February, the folks I met who were just regular people working there, hair, makeup, production, were very nice and professional. I imagine a lot of them have families, and I'm sending love to them, even if we have political disagreements. It does seem like necessarily there are probably some pretty normal apolitical people that are working at the Daily Wire because they have had a massive company. I mean, they had construction workers and lighting specialists that were just building their sets, for instance. You know, they had makeup artists and professional like hairdo people, like getting them all dolled up before their show. Like, there's a big reason why their Daily Wire shows felt so inorganic. Their studios were made to look, you know, handmade by the host in question. You know, like they put this together themselves, like any YouTuber would for their background on a stream, you know, or for their videos. But in reality, it was put together by a team of professionals. Their makeup and hair is done by a team of professionals before every video, and they've got a microphone in their, or a speaker in their ear, feeding them talking points to say to the camera. They're not homespun. They're very corporate and organized, and they always felt very inorganic for that reason. What's Ben Shapiro up to these days? Ben Shapiro debunks 5 lies about socialism. So this is the stuff that the Daily Wire has been putting out lately, and I gotta say, after 7 hours, this video's got 25,000 views, which is unbelievably low for someone of Ben Shapiro's size. Not physically, he's a very small guy, but like the name, that's a name that carries some weight. So let's see, why is he falling off so hard?
Keeps getting a rebrand decade after decade. It's the brand new socialism. The last time that wasn't the real socialism. This one is so much better. Why won't socialism just stay dead? Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, and now, get ready, New York City. In 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in a Parisian cafe over the span of 6 weeks. They, of course, were living high on the hog, you know, in non-communist countries. All of world history, they said, was a class struggle. The proletariat, those would be the workers, are exploited by the bourgeois, those would be the owners. So Marx's solution...
So I think this is an important statement to make, but the Communist Manifesto is not theory. Like, don't get me wrong, it's good. It's good to read, you know, if you're like a socialist or a communist and you want to like get a little bit more rhetorical backing, a little bit of rhetorical buffering to your arguments and beliefs, it's certainly helpful to read. But the Communist Manifesto is not much more than a pamphlet meant for like your average everyday person to get introduced to socialism and class consciousness through. It was intentionally fairly surface level and made no effort to really get deep into the arguments against socialism and why they're false. And it was mostly just like, hey, have you heard of socialism? This is why it's good. And it was meant to be very broadly consumable in a time where a lot of people couldn't read all that well. You know, it's really not that like difficult of a read is my main way of putting it. You know, it wasn't made to be complex intentionally, you know? I mean, anybody here who's read the Communist Manifesto knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's short. It's very like not rushed, but like it's not meant to be this like in-depth, deep treatise on the topic. So just in case you hear anybody try to frame it like it is, that's just false. Regardless of whether or not you're a communist or socialist, that's just not the case.
Was state ownership of the means of production. Marx believed that capitalism would inevitably devour itself and that socialism would arise naturally. Now, it turns out that wasn't true at all, but that's never stopped the socialists. So, what is socialism and what is not? First of all, socialism is not wanting to help poor people. Socialism is instead giving the government complete control of the economy. And it
kind of, but also not really. Where does it say that? Like, yes, technically you could argue that a state-planned economy could qualify as socialist, but generally speaking, in the most raw form, like, bringing up the state in regards to socialism, like, you're diving immediately, like, several layers in. Not every socialist society necessarily needs to have a state as we recognize it in the United States of America. The idea that people like Ben Shapiro desperately try to push is socialism is when you pay a lot of taxes and then everything you need is given to you by the government. There is absolutely nothing, like, Google socialism definition and tell me where in that definition it says that. It doesn't. It doesn't. Socialism is all about the workers gaining autonomy over their labor value. Right now, under capitalism, you as a worker are worth a lot. Your labor value is worth a lot. Arguably, it's diminishing with automation and whatnot, but regardless, your labor is worth something. Arguably more than you're getting paid on an hourly or yearly, daily basis, right? And so the idea behind socialism is to give autonomy to the worker, to the laborer, and allow them to leverage the value of their labor into something like representation within their workplace, and on a grander scale, perhaps even having an impact on policies of, I guess you could call it a company, but in this world, we wouldn't have companies as we know them today. And of course, you could also apply this to a broader sense. Like, let's say we do have a government. It would be highly democratic, with direct democracy affecting policy, not just representative democracy, where we elect the approximate idea of the policies that we favor. There's nothing about government. Socialism is when the government does stuff in the Communist Manifesto. Listen, the Communist Manifesto isn't perfect, but even then, it's not that imperfect. All right, it's not like, oh, we must give everything to the government.
It is a failure everywhere it is tried. The number of deaths caused by socialism in the 20th century alone are staggering. Low estimates are 20 to 30 million people. That would be just based on direct political executions. The mid-range estimates would be 60 to 70 million people if you include man-made famines. And high estimates would include all excess mortality, civil wars, regime policy effects. That would be all the way up to 100 to 148 million people. China under Chairman Mao saw at least 55 million dead in the Great Leap Forward.
Very true. Now, do you want to know why these massive amounts of people died? Because it's easy to say communism killed them because, we're talking about China, we're talking about the Soviet Union, right? But what actually killed these people? Because he mentions, well, what if we include famines and climate disasters? Okay, let's talk about the famines. Let's talk about the famines, because that's one of my favorite topics. And I think it exemplifies exactly why communism has killed so many people, is kind of reductive. Let's start with China. How many of you guys are familiar with the Four Pests initiative, I think it was called? The idea was that communist China was going to wipe out 4 major pests that were terrorizing the farmers of the country. Sparrows, locusts, rats, and I think there was like another one too. I forget what the other one was. Now, the big mistake was they killed billions of sparrows. Billions and billions of them. They basically made them extinct, which led to a massive ecological domino effect, the kind of thing that Republicans and people like Ben Shapiro deny happens or exists, by the way. That led to a cascade of effects, mainly massive locust outbreaks. I know they tried to wipe out the pests and cause a massive pest outbreak that ravaged all of the farmland and caused literally tens of millions of people to die of starvation. Not making excuses for this, I'm just trying to tell you, when we talk about the famines, it's things like that. Now, where in the Communist Manifesto, or frankly in any communist theory, is it suggested that part of communism or socialism is wiping out an entire species of animal and causing an ecological disaster that kills tens of millions in a famine? Like, don't get me wrong, yes, we'll call it communist government did that, but that's just a retarded thing the government did. Yeah, that was a Mao plan, not Marx. Exactly. It's like, yeah. So, and then of course we've got Soviet Russia. Let's talk about the Soviets. Who knows about it was something called the Rapid Industrialization Initiative or something like that. Basically, Soviet Russia said to all these farmers, hey, we want to industrialize fast, so drop your hose and your shovels and your scythes and whatnot, drop all that, you're going to work a factory job now. So they all started working factory jobs. And this included, like, this was the whole Soviet Union, right? So, like, even in Ukraine, people were being forced to stop working on their farms and start working in factories. And this led to a massive shortage in labor for harvesting the crops. And then on top of that, an unseasonably dry few years passed through that caused just the crops themselves weren't doing well, and you had less workers to harvest what was being grown, and it led to a massive shortage in food. And so what did the Soviets do about it? They decided they're going to collect every bit of food they can find within the Soviet Union, divvy out what there is to favored people, mostly Russians and people living at the higher end of the oligarchy. And they're going to specifically, systemically starve certain groups of people. Specifically, Ukrainians were starved. Like, the whole, like, Ukraine-Russia thing goes back a long way. But I think it was, like, millions of Ukrainians, millions were starved to death intentionally by having rations withheld from them during this famine. So yeah, once again, you know, I talk about this not to agree with Ben Shapiro or necessarily disagree. I'm trying to fill in the historical context that no one on the left or right who talks about this topic is brave enough to tell you. Like, Ben Shapiro isn't, well, Ben Shapiro's not honest enough to tell you any of this history. He wants to blame it all on, like, the political system of socialism being responsible, when it's just not. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with these deaths. Like, all the other deaths are primarily politically driven ones. Like the state saying, oh, you don't like the state doing this? We're just going to kill you for that. Like, obviously, that's not part of socialism. But hey, here we are. Now we get conservatives claiming that, this is what socialism is about. And then you get socialists and communists who don't want to dive into the context, denying that this ever happened or making excuses for it. It's very toxic.
China under Chairman Mao saw at least 55 million dead in the Great Leap Forward. Then, of course, the Soviet Union saw under Stalin and Lenin 20 million dead in gulags, the Holodomor famine in Ukraine, the Bolshevik Revolution. Cambodia's Pol Pot saw 2 million dead.
Okay, at least mention the Holodomor famine. I told you all the history behind that there.
Due to starvation and ethnic cleansing, North Korea saw 2 million dead. Due to state-sponsored famine, labor camps, executions, Ethiopia saw 1.
Keep in mind, Ukraine is where, like, all the grain was grown, so Russia took the grain, and then they starved the Ukrainians who grew it.
0.7 million dead in the Red Terror, forced resettlement, and famine. Eastern
But
Europe
that's not
saw 1
socialism.
million dead in
That's
post-World War II
nationalism.
purges, labor camps, and executions. Vietnam saw 1 million dead in re-education camps and purges. And that's not to mention
The commonality in all of these horrific, like, mass killings is nationalism, by the way. Like, socialism is not the common through line here. Well, you could argue perhaps there's a commonality of it existing, but the commonality, the actual through line here of cause and effect is nationalism. It's nationalist fervor that leads to people being put in camps and gulags. It's nationalist fervor that leads to an ethnic group being identified as lesser and starved out in a genocide. It's nationalism that leads to all of the things that you're listing right now. And funny part is, Ben Shapiro is both an American and Israeli nationalist. So that's ironic, huh?
tens or even hundreds of thousands dead who disappeared in Cuba or Venezuela. Let's talk about the objections
Nationalism.
that socialists will speak on behalf of socialism against capitalism. Objection number one, the rich don't pay their fair share. Utter horseshit. Leftists today say that our progressive
The rich don't pay their fair share. As a rich man, that's utter horseshit. Okay, explain it to us, Ben.
income tax does not take into account the fact that billionaires barely have any salaried income whatsoever, and that the wealthy borrow.
It's because we know why, dude. It's they own so many assets. You know, the government could just force them to liquidate a certain amount of their net worth and assets and pay that into taxes, right? Like, we could write laws that require that, and we already make rich people do that when they file for bankruptcy. That's what Alex Jones had to do. He had to sell his assets and liquidate them to pay the courts. Like, we could just pass laws that require the selling and liquidation of assets to pay taxes. Like, we can do that. And all of these multi-billionaires intentionally avoid having high salaries so they don't have to pay taxes. Like, Elon Musk, the reason why he has the meme low salary is so he doesn't have to pay taxes. They mostly get paid in shares of their own company.
Against their assets. They say that corporate tax rates should be hiked as well. And they say the government debt problem isn't real. They can always just print more money. First of all, most U.S. tax collections are on businesses, according to the Tax Foundation. Out of $4.4 trillion collected by the government in 2017, only $308 billion was non-business tax collection, or about 7%. As for the income tax, who pays
Nice deflection. Who owns the businesses?
it? Well, in 2018, the top 1% of earners paid $616 billion in federal income tax. That is 40% of all federal income taxes. The top 1% of taxpayers account for about 20.
Yeah, so why are the richest people who have more than half of the wealth, why are they paying less than half of the taxes? Like I know you thought that was like a big gotcha moment. Like, the top 1% pay 40% of the taxes into the system. Dog, they have more than half of the wealth. Why are they paying less than half of the taxes? I don't care how low of a percentage they are. It's the amount of money they have that matters. In fact, the less of them there are, the more they should be getting forced to pay in taxes. Like, why is this tiny sliver of our population getting coddled, right? Like, oh no, they might have to have one less private island? Like, dog, this is the most powerful, wealthy country on the planet, and yet it's still a country where our own citizens are living on the streets and dying of drug overdose, exposure, like being like there are children who get kicked out of their homes and end up in trafficking because they've got nowhere to go. This is not like becoming of the most powerful and wealthy nation on the planet. I think maybe we could do with some tax reform, maybe a little bit of budget balancing, a little bit less money to war, perhaps, a little bit less money to Israel, maybe, and spend it more on programs that help Americans. And that doesn't mean we need to defund programs like USAID, because the fact was USAID was shown to have been paying off in dividends in benefits to the American people in the long run, way more than what we were paying into it. But people aren't ready for that conversation. We're far from that.
50% of the nation's income. The top 0.1% of taxpayers paid a greater share of the income tax burden than the bottom 75% of taxpayers combined. We already have a massively redistributive system, a massively progressive tax system. And by the way,
we do not have, well, yeah, we do have a progressive tax system. It is true. It's not progressive enough. Like, what do you mean? Let's be real here. The people who would be getting taxed substantially more wouldn't even be people in Ben Shapiro's wealth bracket. Ben Shapiro's wealthy, but he's like, owns a few homes, has a couple businesses, kind of wealthy. Like, certainly bourgeoisie, but not the kind of wealthy we're talking about here, The people, the level of wealth we're talking about here is so much more wealthy than what the average person thinks of when they hear rich person, Like, Ben Shapiro is the level of wealthy that, like, that one kid at your school who had rich parents, like their dad had that much money, Like, a somewhat common to encounter, relatively speaking, amount of wealth is what Ben has. The wealth we're talking about here, the 1% of the 1%, we're talking magnitudes of hoarded wealth. A dragon's hoard shared among like 30 people.
None of this includes what people receive back in tax dollars, meaning, for example, the earned income tax credit, which disproportionately affects low-income households, many of whom don't pay tax in the first place. In fact, if you look at net taxes, meaning the amount you pay in taxes minus the services you collect from the government, people in the top quintiles pay all tax in the United States.
So this is a really interesting one, because I decided to dive into this after I heard a phrase that just prickled when I heard it. It didn't sound right to me. It didn't sound real. Net taxpayer is a phrase I heard. I kept hearing it from right-wing people who were like really against their tax dollars going to anything that wasn't what they claimed to be helping Americans. They would call themselves net taxpayers, such that like they're claiming that they pay more into the system than they collect from it. And I immediately raised an eyebrow. When I looked into net taxpayer as a concept, I found that that's not a real phrase. Like, the US government does not categorize people into net taxpayers and net tax consumers. Like, that's not a thing that they, because like the way you would calculate that requires so much data. You would have to be extrapolating massively. The amount that people even unknowingly use U.S. taxpayer funds on a daily basis is immeasurable. Like, do you use roads? Is one of the most common, but like there are countless other examples. Like, every time you go to a restaurant with the like sureness you're not going to get sick, thank you government, thank you U.S. tax dollars. Every time you stop at a red light and it turns green and you like go with a relative sureness that the stoplight isn't green for the other road and you're not going to get T-boned like that, thank you US tax dollars. When you can tune into the news and know what the weather is going to be, thank you US tax dollars. Like, the idea of a net taxpayer has to be a fucking myth. It has to be. I like this idea that most people are just paying into a system they're getting nothing from. Complete fucking myth. Anytime you hear that phrase, net taxpayer, like, complete made-up term. I don't know what it was about the phrase, but I heard it and it like set off alarm bells and I had to start digging, and I immediately found out it was bullshit. But this should explain everything you need to know about why the Daily Wire has fallen off. You know, they were always making up bullshit, but when Ben Shapiro was making up bullshit about economics to try to convince a not wealthy audience that they shouldn't have any concerns about the amount that wealthy people are paying into taxes. Like, this is the area where Ben has always had the least amount of pull. Ben's always been a massive simp for the wealthy, and even among his own audience, there's a growing discontent with the ultra wealthy. This like classic conservative, like the ultra wealthy are beyond reproach mindset is just not popular anymore with young people on the left or the right. It's just too blatantly reality denying. And so here we are, Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. Seems like they're on their way out. They just can't adjust their beliefs, even rhetorically, in the public in order to match what the times call for.